Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the most prominent son of the former Libyan leader, was reportedly killed on February 3, 2026, during a violent raid on his home in Zintan. Now, according to his legal team, 4 masked gunmen managed to disable the security systems before storming the residence, leading to a fatal shootout. While he had lived in the shadows for over a decade under the protection of local militias, his death marks a definitive and bloody end to the Gaddafi family's lingering political influence in the country. His assassination removes one of Libya's most polarizing figures from the board. Now, for years, he was a ghost candidate sentenced to death by a court in Tripoli and wanted by the International Criminal Court, yet still viewed by some as a potential savior who could restore stability. With his death, the hope of a green revolution comeback effectively dies with him, leaving the Libyan government to investigate who sent the gunmen and what his power vacuum, or this power vacuum, will mean for an already fractured nation. Joining us to speak more on this conversation, we have Ejike Okpa, a global affairs analyst in Texas, U.S. Thank you so much, Ejike, for joining us at this time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's get straight to the heart of this. Let's get into the implications, and let's begin on the professional nature of the hit. Reports actually indicate that the attackers were 4 masked men who successfully disabled sophisticated security surveillance before the raid. Speak to us on your thoughts and what this level of precision or surgical precision suggests. Are you thinking a local militia score settling or a professional state intelligence apparatus, either domestic or foreign?
You know, it's one of those things you think about it, you say, how did they get there? How come they were successful? Obviously, it's got to be some internal intelligence that, enabled the 4 masked men or killers to go in there and, disable the security system and then stay carried out what they wanted to do. It makes us think that, when people want you, regardless of what you have around you, oftentimes they get their way. It is very, very, very sad, but, I don't think whoever did this, woke up one day and said, we're going to do it. He wasn't killed on the street. He wasn't killed abroad. He was killed in Libya. And he was obviously killed by people who, I don't know how long they might have been targeting him, and they finally got him. So I think they are doing the investigation. Hopefully the investigation is going to give more information and shed more light on how this was planned and was, executed.
All right, now, Saif was often described as the most guarded man in Libya. Since his capture in November 2011, the Zintan brigades used him as a political leverage against Tripoli. So why do you think that, his protectors actually failed to protect him at this time?
Well, of course they failed because, the gunmen were successful. Maybe there's an inside job in here. Maybe one of the security people around him was able to share information on how to disable the system or how, to get to him. Like you said, since 2011, 14 years in the making, they still went after him. So obviously there was something that they felt, hey, if we take out this guy, not that Libya is going to become hunky-dory, maybe at least we eliminate one roadblock and then we go after the other people. But, getting after him and being successful in getting after him obviously is going to send a signal to other people and say, hey, if the most protected individual, son of a former president, could be killed this way, you guys better watch it. And that's what they try to do. You go for the big fish, and then the small fish obviously may want to go hide or just, give it up.
Okay. Ejike, but who do you think benefits from his removal or from his death? Because we know that Saif was the figurehead of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Libya. Now, with his death, does the Green Movement, those nostalgic for the Gaddafi era simply evaporate, or does he become a more dangerous matter, for a movement that still claims the support of hundreds of thousands of Libyans? Because even the 444 Combat Brigade has categorically denied involvement. And we're speaking in a country where the line between state security and militia is quite blurred. So who benefits most from his removal?
Well, the people who went after him are going to benefit, but we don't know what the benefits are. Obviously, there's going to be, very, different reactions for and against. At the end of the day, even though he has been killed, there's still going to be the lingering effect of people who said he shouldn't have been, and then, they too are going to start planning their own thing. So the chaos has no end. They've taken out the big fish. Who knows who is the next big fish? Or everybody now say, the killing is enough. Can we run a country? At the end of the day, people are going to die, but why should they die under the circumstances? So that's what you get, coming from a certain family, of course, is going to expose, people to danger. And that danger is going to be because, hey, okay, we took out your father, a family member, we're going to take you out. Remember, the anger, it has been going on, for centuries. It's not new today. And so despite security measures, protections, bulletproof, and all this other stuff, still he was able to be killed. What does that tell you? The human being, the human factor is very, very difficult to surprise, because anger can go on. Even somebody might come and pretend to you, I will love you the best, and at the same time, they can turn around and harm you. So nobody, I don't know who's going to benefit from it. It's just added additional fire to the already, flaming fire in Libya.
All right. The International Criminal Court, has chased Saif since June 2011 for murder and, persecution. Now, with him now dead, the ICC case is effectively closed without a verdict. So what does this mean for the victims of the 2011 revolution who have waited for 15 years for a legal reckoning? What happens next? I mean, how was a man under an ICC arrest warrant and a Tripoli death sentence able to live in a residential home in Zintan, with enough autonomy to hold political meetings? What does this even say about the total collapse of, a centralized judicial authority in Libya?
Well, it doesn't, it doesn't say a whole lot. It shows a weak institution, which is what you see in most of African countries and some other developing countries. Instead of, they're taking on their own people and trying them, they defer to the international court, and then the international court don't have any army, they're just going to have to, issue convictions, and then if issue an arrest warrant. But how many people have they been able to arrest, even with the issued arrest warrant? I mean, Netanyahu of Israel, has an arrest warrant on him, but what are the likelihoods, he's going to be picked up? So, but for developing countries, I think this is where they come in and say, you know what, we don't want to be embarrassing our country as it is. Let us face things that our own people do, and if we are able to prove it, we're going to try them, domestically, and, apportion the proper punishment. But if it's, let somebody come do it for you, then you get what somebody come do it for you means. And in this case, I don't think, the court can still go ahead and issue, what I call a consolatory judgment, finding him guilty. But if you find him guilty after the fact, then what happens to that? The people that made the petition for him to be tried, what do they get? Is there a compensation package? They can go to them. I'm just saying that, the world is in influx, and that influx oftentimes is because majority of the countries in the world have been unable to build institutions that could be stronger than individuals. When you have stronger individuals that run countries, they do it at their own wish, and then you have people, small population of people that benefit from that a strong individual, encouraging them to do it. So it's not a perfect world, but it can be a good world where responsibility and accountability becomes something that everybody knows. If I do it and that they catch me, I'm going to pay for it.
So, Ejike, now, Libya entered 2026 in what people have actually called a frozen chaos, especially analysts has actually called it that, because with 2.8 million voters still waiting for a stalled presidential election. So Saif was a polarizing but major candidate in, the upcoming elections. Does his removal pave the way for a clearer race, or does it prove that no candidate is safe enough to actually run?
Well, as I can go for your question, the point is that, again, me saying that he's a big fish, he's gone. So other people might just, go quietly. And then, going quietly doesn't mean they have surrendered. They may just go to recuperate, hibernate for a period and come back and inflict more damages. A lot of people are angry. Since 2011, Gaddafi left, you could see how Libya has fallen. Gaddafi was very strong, and he was strong because he was really very suppressive. He was a suppressive leader. His son, this guy, if you go look into history, he was the guy who was buying cars and crashing them in Europe and leaving them and picking another one. People remember these things. People remember, how they have been abused because he happened to come from a family. So, how long is that anger? It goes on forever because people want to live a life of decency. But when they are being oppressed and the family people show up, that's why I've always cautioned, tell your family members, even if you're enjoying all the good, stay away from this. It's not about you. It's about serving the country. You could see what is going on in the case of Nigeria, where the sons of governors and the sons of the president, they are all out there throwing their weights, displaying things while people are suffering. You think most people are not going to be angry, and most people are going to be disappointed and say, hey, wishing them well or wishing them bad. So, again, play this role, do the fish-tailing thing. Hey, your family members may not be suffering, but other people are suffering. And that is what leadership is supposed to focus on. Who are the people suffering? And how can my policies and politics help those people to have at least a sense of belonging so they don't have this anger that leads to people wanting to come after you no matter where you are. It's over. Again, after a while now, people are going to move on. That's just life. But look at the history of how this prominent Libyan family has been destroyed. Their father been killed, and some other people have, and now, this guy, maybe there's nobody left in the Gaddafi clan.
All right, so we're about wrapping up now. So would love to have your final thoughts on all of this, and would also like to remind the viewers that in February 2021, Saif famously warned on state TV that rivers of blood would flow if the regime fell. So 15 years later, he has fallen into those very currents. So we also know that the Libyan Attorney General has opened an investigation, but in a country where even the 2015 death sentence against Saif could never be carried out due to militia control, do you think that the Libyan public will trust a state-led investigation into his killing?
Not necessarily, because again, the trust factor in Libya, if you were to wage trust factor on a scale of 1 to 10, you might just be 1. Or it might even be minus, because, what the trust has to be earned. It is not an automatic thing. And so what is the government doing? What has the past leadership done, to make the people say, at least I believe in this government, 50-50, or, more than just 1. So it comes again down to the personalities. Yes, the Attorney General is going to do investigation, but how long is that investigation? And even if they come out and say, oh, this is how it happened, will people believe it? Again, it's about the trust factor. The world has gotten so much, disenchanted with leaders. It doesn't matter whether it's a developed country or a developing country. And we have to all come around again and say, how can we do this thing better? How can we focus on what matters to us, and which is food, shelter, and clothing, and protection, as public safety for the people, as opposed to this glamorous display of things that leaders do at the end of the day. It angers most people. I'm about that basic aspect of life for the citizens in a country. Yes, you don't want your president to feed off the gutter, but at the same time, the president should not be feeding off on the table, and 99% of the people are feeding off the gutter. It's not a just world, because some of these things can be taken care of by a good leadership. You do your time, you step aside. You know, everybody's going to end up in a coffin, you know, if they find their body or some kind of way. So why don't you just look at that and use that as the basis to say, you know, I have my time, let me make good use of it and make other people feel good or have good feelings. And so him going, Libya is going to be there. Libya is not going to vanish because, Gaddafi clan people have vanished. There's going to be other people that are going to surface, but then if they surface, are they going to do better? Would they say, lessons learned, let me be the one that can reunify the people, at least bring a majority of them to be unified in order for us to have a country we're all happy about?
All right, well, thank you so much for that. But just before we let you go, just a few updates. Ironically, Libya just hit a milestone of 1.374 million barrels of oil per day in January 2026. So questions are being asked about the assassination and how it threatens the recent $20 billion energy deal signed with Total Energies and ConocoPhillips. Also Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar has long shared the eastern political space with Gaddafi loyalists. So there are questions around if this death will consolidate Haftar's status as the strong man in the east. And if, anyone else in the Gaddafi family, perhaps his brother Al-Saadi or sister Aisha, could step up to his political role. But thank you so much, Ejike Okpa, for your time and for speaking on this. Ejike Okpa is a global affairs analyst.
Thank you for having me.